Right, well, kia ora everyone. I can see people are joining the webinar. We know how this works. It takes a little while for everyone to come in, but let me just start by introducing myself. I'm Craig Young. I'm the CEO of 2Ants, and it's a great pleasure to be hosting with Sophie and Rachel today this webinar, which we're doing under our FLINT brand. So that's our Future Leaders in Tech. It's a great program, and Sophie is one of our long-standing leadership members she's even wearing the T-shirt today, in Otatahi, Christchurch. So it's great to be doing it with her. Today's webinar is being recorded, so it will be able to be reviewed. And those of you that are watching it now on the recording, I'm glad you were able to join us. For those of you that are live, it's great to have you here as well. The Q&A is live, and you can enter questions into there. You can answer them with your name or anonymously. I've also put it so you can vote questions up. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go through the two presentations. So Sophie will go first, and then Rachel. And then we will do Q&A, and I will moderate the Q&A, and I'll be looking for those questions that have risen to the top, because it usually happens that we can't get through all the questions that people ask. So, if you think it's a great question, vote it up. Or if you go, yes, I wished I'd asked that one as well, vote that up as well. Well, let's get started. Today's topic is, has the tech bubble burst? Preparing and overcoming redundancy. And we were just mentioning offline just the number of redundancies we're seeing around the place. There's an article in the Herald just come out this morning talking about staff at AWS, Amazon Web Services, waiting to hear news today as well. So, some of these big tech companies are actually moving through and making people redundant. I mean, if you're working for Twitter, then you probably aren't anymore, because they've got rid of 75 to 80% of their staff since Elon Musk brought them out. So that's a pretty big number. We're going to get started today, and it's my great pleasure to introduce Sophie. Sophie Ricketts is a learning designer at the Alliance Group and a long-standing member, as I said, of the Christchurch FLINT lead team, but her and I go back a long way further than that. We won't bore you with that story today. Today, she's going to talk about her personal experience with the redundancy, how she changed her scary situation into a career-defining opportunity, and aligning her career in the direction that fits her values. So welcome, Sophie, and I'll hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Craig. Real pleasure to be here. We ran this as a live event in Christchurch last month, and it was really, really well received. So Rachel and I were both pretty keen to revisit this material for a webinar, just to reach more people. So yeah, I'm going to dive right in. So my experience with redundancy, I got made redundant in 2020. What was going on then, eh? So I worked for Spark for 9 years, and I just a little bit about my history with the company. So I joined them when they were still telecom, and was a part of the organization while it transitioned into the new name and the new branding of Spark. I worked as initially as a retail manager, and then climbed the ladder and worked my way up through various leadership positions. So across my 9 years, I probably did a total of about 6 different roles. So for a while, I was territory manager, and yeah, just leading bigger teams and more people and more sites and that kind of thing. But for me, the thing that I was really passionate about was I was really, really passionate about making sure that people got inducted really well, and making sure that they had a really good learning journey when they arrived, because I know that it's that first impression that makes a big difference on whether or not people stay and how you retain staff. So that was something I was always really passionate about. And I started making resources that I could use with my own team when they were joining and being inducted. And then eventually I started sharing those resources and started collaborating with some of my other colleagues and other managers. And then I got to a point where I was like, well, I don't just want this stuff to be rolled out in one city or in one area. I actually would love to be responsible for creating learning materials and training materials that could reach the whole company. So yeah, I eventually moved into what was my dream role, working in the learning and development team. and creating learning resources for the whole country. It was really exciting. And I moved into that position. I started in that position 2 days before we went into lockdown. And we worked really hard. We had 6 months of like really amazing productivity. We were able to, pivot and adapt with COVID. And there were a couple of projects that sort of got scraped to the side and a couple of real big ones that got pulled to the front. And we worked through them quite quickly. And then as a result, a number of us got made redundant, which was, for me, a really, really big shock. And so I'm going to start by talking to you about how that felt. So I 100% went through the 7 stages of grief as part of receiving that news. And the first one was shock. I was really, really surprised, really, really felt like the rug got pulled out from under me. Even though the company had communicated that there were going to be roles that were disestablished, including my own, I was not worried because there were other roles that were being created. And, I'm not silly, like I can do math. I could see that the number of roles that were being disestablished was a little bit higher than the number of roles that were being created, but I still had a lot of confidence in myself. I'd been with the company for a long time. I had a really impressive track record, not just as a people leader, but also in terms of hitting KPIs. And there were a couple of roles that I had stepped into that were brand new. So I'd created a blueprint of kind of how other people would do those roles and how they would get how they'd sort of get rolled out further throughout the country. So I was feeling really secure about who I am, what I bring to the table, the skills that I possess. But yeah, in the end, that was not enough. And I would compare being made redundant to going through the worst breakup I've ever been through in my whole life. It was super unpleasant. It really, really smashed my self-esteem. Like my self-esteem was just absolutely in the toilet. I had gone from feeling really, really secure and confident about my abilities to really, really doubting myself and questioning my abilities. Let's get back to those 7 stages of grief, shall we? So first there was shock. Once that kind of subsided, that gave way to denial. Denial was a short stage for me, but it definitely still featured on the radar because there was that moment of like, this can't be real. This can't be happening. This is a mistake. Somebody's going to correct this mistake. Nope. And that moved into anger. I was really angry. I was really angry for a while, actually. And that was really scary. I'm a pretty positive person. Those who know me know that I'm pretty enthusiastic about most things. So I really felt like there was just a total flip in my personality, and it was quite confronting in terms of sort of, monitoring my own reactions to the experience. After that, bargaining, again, a pretty short stage, but a stage nonetheless, thinking about what could I have done differently? So not necessarily bargaining as in like actively trying to get my role back, but more about like, okay, replaying the situation and how could I have handled this differently? And I think that there's a lot of merit in doing that, in self-reflection and kind of figuring out like, how could I improve or what could I change? But you got to have a healthy boundary. And I think for me, it was not super healthy. There was a lot of kind of almost like an obsession with sort of, I wish I could go back and redo it. And you can't because it's already happened. Thankfully, once I moved on from that, everybody's favorite, depression. So that was awesome. I had a really, really rough time. I cried every day for at least a week, probably a little bit longer, maybe a week and a half. Just had these bouts of, loneliness and self-doubt and anger and feeling like I wasn't connected anymore to, the team that I'd worked in and the people that I built relationships with, but also not wanting to reach out and not wanting to be connected. So that was a pretty low time. Finally, we reached stage 6, which was acceptance, which was figuring out that this has happened. This is the reality. I could keep replaying it over and over in my mind, but I'm never going to move forward. So yeah, once I accepted it, the thing that really helped me accept it was I got some really good advice. I also got some really terrible advice as well. Probably the really defining sort of feature of sort of my experience with redundancy was I had a lot of support. I had a lot of people sort of, try their best to wrap around me and show me their support and give me their support. And, a couple of special mentions absolutely go out to my husband and to my parents and to, other members of my family. I had a lot of friends who reached out as well, which is really cool. But in the moment, it's really, really tough when you're going through something that is so dark and layered, and particularly if people have not experienced it, they don't know what to say. And we do this thing as humans, we do this thing where when we don't know what to say, what we should probably say is, wow, I don't know what to say. I've got no words, but we don't. We then try and find a bunch of words. And for the person who's experiencing the thing, that sometimes doesn't land super well. And I can laugh about it now, because I know absolutely that everybody had their heart in the right place. But I'm going to share with you the advice that I got real value out of and that really, really helped me to work through that stage of acceptance and then finally step into the final stage, which was hope. And a good buddy of mine, somebody who I'd worked with, somebody who I really respected, somebody who some of our FLINT audiences will have met before because we've had him as a speaker at some of our FLINT events previously. And that was my buddy, Nick Mackison-Smith. And he gave me a piece of advice, which I still really, really think about, and in terms of how powerful it was and kind of getting me to move forward. And I'm going to paraphrase, but what he said was, this really sucks. Really, really sucks. And it is just, there's no two ways about it. This is awful. And you are allowed to acknowledge that, and you're allowed to feel that, and you're allowed to, kind of sit and process your feelings about that. But the reason it sucks so much is because it's the first time. And Sophie, the sooner you get on board with the fact that this is the first time, and not the only time, and not the last time that you're going to go through redundancy, the better you're going to feel and the sooner you're going to pick yourself up. And it really did help. Reflecting on the fact that, it's something that I hadn't gone through before, but lots of people had, and also, being in the environment I was in terms of I guess globally, we were navigating a pandemic. I definitely was not the only person going through redundancy in that moment, and not just at Spark. There were a lot of companies that, were trying to adapt and pivot. And one of the only ways that they could save their bottom line was to, sort of trim the fat and figure out what they needed and what they didn't need anymore. The other thing that he said to me, which really helped, was that it wasn't personal. And at first that really got my back up. That made me really defensive. I thought, well, it feels pretty freaking personal to me right now. And I had all the normal adult financial stresses that kind of went along with that, and feeling like, how am I contributing to the cost of running a household and my mortgage and, and all of these other responsibilities. But when he was sort of breaking it down to me, he was like, it's not personal. And it feels personal. It feels distinctly personal because it's something that you're really, really in the middle of right now. But the sooner you can kind of separate those feelings and kind of recognize that, yes, you worked for a company that I really, really liked. I really, really liked working for Spark. Yes, you worked for a company with people that you cared about and had relationships with. Yep, that was totally me. I really, really cared about my team. I cared about pretty much every person that I had ever hired and trained. And, so I felt like I was leaving quite a big web of relationships. And I felt like they'd all kind of gotten scraped in the bin. But he was saying to me, you got to break down the fact that at the end of the day, no matter how much the company says they value you, no matter how much they show you that they value you, no matter how much, time and energy and resources they put into, great perks and making sure that you've got access to the things you need to live your life and do your job well. I'm not just talking about salary. I'm talking about additional things like, annual leave balances. And I'm talking about stuff like health insurance. I'm talking about stuff like, heck, I worked for Spark. I didn't pay for my home broadband, didn't pay for my cell phone, didn't pay for my husband's cell phone. It was was a very generous employment package. And, no matter how many things they did and provided to show their people, we really care about you, at the end of the day, you're a number. And I still remember my number. I was T817201. Like, I was quite literally a number. You use that to log into systems and to, to be administered with payroll and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's just a reminder that for them, it's a really deeply personal relationship up until it's not. And then you're just a number. And then they're just treating everybody kind of on a, I don't know, I wouldn't say an equal playing field, but like on a playing field. So those two things, reminding me that it was the first time I was going through it, but it wouldn't be the last. And reminding me that for me, it feels personal, but for them, it's strictly business. And at the end of the day, those two things really, really pulled me into the 6th stage of acceptance, and then ultimately into the 7th stage, which was hope. One of the other things that I kind of did for me that worked really well for me was I have always been a person who really thrives on routine. I like order. I like control. So one of the things that made the redundancy so hard was feeling like I had kind of lost all of that. I was really unmoored and felt like I didn't really have kind of a sense of purpose or a sense of schedule. So I gave myself one. And the way I did that was, for me, I decided that what was going to be specific and measurable and realistic was that I was going to try to apply for one job every day. And if I applied for more than one in a day, terrific. And if I had a day that was really, really rough and I, didn't quite get there, I was going to give myself some slack. But just having a goal of applying for one job every day gave me a really, really good sense of purpose, gave me a kind of a strong kind of anchor to hold on to, and really reminded me of all of my skills. I know that I'm a really skilled individual. It was a great way to revisit the things that I'm good at and to remind myself of the things that I did really, really well when I worked for Spark, or that I did really well for other employers prior to that. So that was pretty cool. And the other thing that helped me was a reminder that each day only exists once. You never have to live it again. And that's not to say that there aren't going to be other super crappy days, but if you're having a particularly bad day or a particularly tough day or a particularly shit day, you never have to do it again. Yeah, that day's going to end and you're going to lay down and you're going to go to sleep, and it doesn't rewind like Groundhog Day. Instead, it's off the table and it's over. So that really helped me as well. A couple of big lessons. Yeah. So a couple of really, really big lessons that I learned, things that I probably couldn't see in the moment, but that upon reflection really, really stayed with me. Yeah. So number one was, my self-worth was so intrinsically tied to my job, to what I did and who I worked for and who I did it with. That was really, really dangerous. Yeah. And I didn't realize how dangerous that was until I was like quite literally in the danger zone, until my self-esteem was down the toilet and I felt really abandoned and, totally untethered. So for me, it was a very, very big character building experience of recognizing that my self-worth doesn't just come from my job. I'm not just the work I do. I'm all kinds of other things. I have so many hobbies and so many other friendships and relationships and so many things that I'm involved in, not just Flint, but like there were so many things that I was like, oh my God, I'm not just Sophie who worked for Spark. I'm all these other things as well. Also, big reflection for me was I've always been a person who thinks of life as being really long. So I'm always looking far ahead in the future, and I like to plan, and I like that sense of control. So it was a big wake up call for me that actually maybe life's a little bit shorter than I think. This is just one example, but there's always going to be stuff out there that I can't control, that I don't have any say over, or that I can't predict. And it definitely made me a little bit more comfortable with a life is short mentality. So it's changed my attitude about a few things and the way I look at stuff and the way I kind of do things. It provided me with an opportunity to think about, well, I really loved that job and I loved that employer, but was it perfect? No, there was definitely stuff that I kind of had wished I could change. So now that I didn't work there anymore, what would I change? And that really, really helped me come up with what my priorities were in terms of looking for a new job. So that attitude helped carry me through to decide, was there anything that was holding me back? Were there things that I was so dedicated to in the realm of Spark that it closed my eyes and, and put up blinders and meant that I wasn't kind of looking for other opportunities or thinking outside that box? And one of the big things that came out of that was I started thinking about what are some of the key priorities for me as a person? What are the things that I want to do in terms of the contribution I want to make to the world that we live in and the society that I work in? And a big part of that was thinking about the type of volunteer work that I do and how much fulfillment I get out of that. So not just with organizations like FLINT, but there's another organization that I volunteer with as well. And it made me think, it'd be pretty amazing to work for a charity. And then having that attitude meant that I ended up looking at jobs that previously I never would have considered because they were different types of roles in different industries. I had very initially just been thinking like, telco, that's what I'm good at and that's what I know how to do and that's what feels safe to me. So it got me to kind of like broaden my horizons, which was really, really cool. And then it ended up meaning that combined with that life is short mentality, I did something that previously I never ever would have done. I applied for a role in a totally different industry in a type of organization that I'd never worked for before, which was a charity. And I applied for a very short fixed term position, which previously I wouldn't have done either, because to me that would have felt really unsafe. That would have felt like, there's not enough stability. I got to think long term. Life is really long. But I had a really, really good experience. And it was a great way to get back on the horse. So my first job outside of Spark after that redundancy was working for a charitable organization. I was on a 4-month fixed term contract. I was in a leadership position, which was like all of my skills, so transferable. It was really, really positive. I was just covering the end of somebody's maternity leave. And I felt like I was making a huge contribution. And when I exited that role, I got really great feedback and felt like, oh my gosh, yeah, I've done all these things. They're really measurable. It really, really boosted my self-esteem and made me feel so good about, moving forward and the skills I have and the way I can use them in different industries. So what happened next? I was able to reframe my redundancy as an opportunity to totally redefine my career expectations and also my career aspirations. So that was pretty cool. I wasn't just on the hamster wheel inside one organization. And like I said, I've got nothing bad to say about Spark. I really, really loved working there. And I thought that I was going to work there for a really, really long time. So it was quite a shock. It was quite a rude awakening, but it was great to get out and see what else is out there and kind of, have some other experiences and really kind of know my worth and know myself. It gave me an opportunity to get back in touch with sort of what are my ideals, what's important to me as a person, not just as a person at work, and gave me the opportunity to think about, am I chasing a specific type of role, like a very specific position, or do I want to work for a specific type of company? Do I want to widen out that scope and think more about who I'm working for and what they do and how they contribute to society, as opposed to just the little grain of sand that I am in that beach? It was a big, big reminder that nothing is permanent. Everything in life is temporary, including your job. And that is okay, because changing my mindset really, really removed the fear. Routine, super important to me. I got a lot of benefit out of that. And also understanding and recognizing the mechanisms I had for support. I had great people around me. I had a super, super supportive spouse and a super supportive family, which was, it might sound silly, but initially that was quite hard for me to acknowledge, because I've always been a very independent person. And so I felt like, well, this is happening to me, so I'm the person who's going to pull me out of it, and I'm the person who's going to do all these things. No, I didn't have to do all that, because I actually had a great support network around me. And the quicker I leaned on them, actually, the faster I bounced back. Overall, I mean, would I go through it again? I probably will. We all will at some stage. Do I want to? Heck no. It was super uncomfortable. It was gross. I didn't like it. I give it a 0-star review. But do I feel okay about it? Yeah, I can absolutely laugh about it now. I I mean, you know, there were a lot of tears, but ultimately I would say it's definitely not the best thing that ever happened to me, but it's probably not the worst thing either.
Thanks so much, Sophie. T811814. That was my number.
That was
There
yours?
you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Except ours changed from T numbers to C numbers when we became chorus. So we took the
Yeah.
same number and it just became C.
When we switched from Telecom to Spark, we all just still kept the T. So everybody still had the T number. Yeah.
Sure. Hey, thank you so much. Can I just remind people on the call that if you've got questions, type them into the Q&A so that others can see what the question is as well. And then we can vote it up and down and see where it is. We're going to do the questions after Rachel. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Rachel Tobeck. She's the practice lead for Dev and Data with Career Technology Recruitment in Christchurch. She's going to share some practical tips about CVs, LinkedIn, preparing for the hump, etc., etc. So over to you, Rachel.
Hi, how is everybody this afternoon? I'll just share my screen with you all. Won't be a moment. Okay, hopefully everyone can see my screen. Can you see that, Craig?
Yep, go for it.
No, that's cool. Yeah, so as Craig said, I'm Rachel Tobeck. I'm the Principal Consultant Dev and Data at Career Technology Recruitment. I'm based in Christchurch. So yeah, Sophie and I did this session a few weeks ago in person, so we thought we'd bring it online as well with all the redundancies that is happening in the tech space at the moment. We can share some insights for you. So here we go. I don't know what's happening here. So I just wanted to share, I just pulled some data off Seek last night on the laws of attraction, obviously like a bit of nicety kind of stuff, what draws people to roles in the New Zealand IT sector. So it's quite interesting information. Obviously, I don't know what their pool of people was that they were pulling this information from. But yeah, we can see that women are really unrepresented, compared to men in the sector. Good income to be made. And it's almost 50-50 people that were born in New Zealand and born elsewhere. So there's some quite cool data available there. And also age, 25 to 54, quite most of our sector is sitting in that age bracket and above that. So this was something quite interesting, what draws people to a career in tech. And back in 2019, when I first did this as an in-person seminar for one of the tech grad schools here, with different things like salary and compensation was really important to people in this industry, career development and opportunities, and last is work-life balance. And then roll ahead to call it post-COVID, but COVID's kind of rearing its ugly head again, especially in Canterbury at the moment. Back to 2023, salary is also really important, but now we've actually work-life balance, obviously with all those people being working from home and having that flexibility, that is something more important than it used to be. And then the career development opportunities. So there's 7 essential employability skills, which everybody would use in their career. Things like your attitude, that's really, really important, no matter what industry you're working in. Your communication skills, your growth mindset, critical thinking, self-management, your teamwork, and resilience as well is very important. So obviously you've got different types of skills in tech. So you've got your employability skills, that you've used, which I just discussed, those 7 skills. You've got your transferable skills. So as Sophie said, like with the role she was doing at Spark to where she is now, there were a lot of skills that were transferable. And when she went into the job working for a charity as well, which is a job she never thought she would look at. And then you've got your specialist skills. So you've got your certificates and your qualifications and things like that. So I guess the purpose of today, I just wanted to share with everybody how to write a good CV, and I guess things not to put in a CV as well. So I guess the number one key factor when writing your CV, honesty is the best policy. Redundancies happen. It's happened to me before in my life as well. And I was working in the internal talent and workforce management space and kind of thought to myself, what do I do? Where to now from me? And that's when I started You're obviously going out to recruitment agencies and working with recruiters and realizing, I don't know, I didn't have a great experience working with them, and I'm like, I can do better. I'm a people person. So that's when I decided, hey, I could work in external recruitment and help people find jobs. So that's where I kind of found myself. Yeah, and it's going to happen to most of us at least once in our working career. On your CV, a question we quite often get asked by people is in regards to your career gaps. So, yeah, like you may have gone off on parental leave, or you may have been looking after a sick relative, or taken some time off to do some study. Don't be afraid to note that on your CV. It's really good to be upfront with that. If your role, you may have had some roles which are a short duration, it could have been a contract role. Just make sure you note contract on there, because that's something an employer will look at. Why have they only been there 6 months? I mean, it could also be that the role you were sold in the first place was not what the actual role was that you were actually doing once you started the role, and it was really crap, and you decided. So then you don't want to down the employer that you're working with, but you obviously can't note that on your CV, but you can have that conversation. Be upfront and honest with that. Things to avoid when you're writing CVs, and it's quite any recruiter will probably tell you exactly the same things, and it's astonishing actually the amount of CVs we get that have these things on it. So, your incorrect contact information. Make sure you update your contact details. Yes, a lot of people, have prepaid mobile phones and may have changed them and haven't changed the phone number on them. That's kind of important to do. You could miss out on securing the interview. I wouldn't include personal details so much, like your age, your gender, your marital status, your children. They're totally unrelated to the job you're applying for, and you leave yourself open for stereotyping and unconscious bias, and won't have the opportunity to change these opinions like you will when you're in an interview. And email addresses as well. Keep it professional. I know, when we were teenagers, we all had like funny, quirky email addresses. It's not very professional having things like that. If you're looking for a job, keep it more professional than that. Some of my top tips when you're writing a CV, make sure you include your contact details, like your name, your email address and phone number, LinkedIn profile, that potential employers can get in touch with you. Something that's really important as well is make sure your CV and your LinkedIn marry up, because it's actually quite interesting. As recruiters, we will look at your LinkedIn profile if we think you look good, and like if there's things that are kind of amiss, it kind of alerts, red flags if they're not the same as what's on them. Start with a strong personal statement that summarizes your skills and experience and your career goals and aspirations. Highlight your work experience. So I'd start with your most current, where you were first, down to your oldest role. So obviously in your work experience, you want things like, what was your role? What company you worked for, the dates you worked for that, what are some of the accomplishments you did, while that you were in that role, some of the skills you used, which are really good. And, as your accomplishments, quantify your achievements where possible, use metrics and statistics to demonstrate your impact on there. And also include things like your education and qualifications. You want to make your CV quite easy to read. For someone, because recruiters receiving a lot of CVs at any time, so you want to make it stand out. Include any relevant skills, certifications, or if you're in technology like a developer or something, any languages you've mastered, or even like different languages like your English, your Spanish, your French, whatever that you've mastered. Anything that can add value to the job you're applying for. Always make sure you proofread your CV carefully and ask someone else to review it before you submit it. I mean, I know it's happened to me. I've done something in Word, gone and saved it to PDF, and it's totally out of whack and looks absolutely terrible. So you just want to make sure you're getting it right first time. Make sure there's no spelling mistakes or grammar errors, and that your formatting is consistent throughout there. Something we quite often get asked, cover letters. Are they important? Why write a cover letter anymore? I mean, a cover letter is your opportunity to stand out from the crowd and sell yourself to a future employer. Whether, like, if you're applying for a role on Seek, I think there's an opportunity to like copy and paste your cover letter in there. If you're applying via email, you can either attach it or use it in the body of your email. With that, but they're certainly, very important. Obviously, when you're writing a cover letter, you need to make sure that it relates to the role that you're applying for and it is addressed to the correct person. Quite often we will receive cover letters that are not directed at the person, that they should be responding to, and for a completely different role. Which is quite interesting. You want to get straight to the point. Don't waffle during that. Provide evidence of your skills and your relevant experience in the role, but be brief. So have a look at what they're looking for on the job ad and how your skills can reflect that. What value can you add to the business? Remember, you are marketing yourself, so you want to get it right. Make your cover letter look purposeful. You need to show you know what you're talking about with that. Something else that's really, really important in today's day and age is your branding, because we're so much into social media these days. You want to make sure you are visible out there and creating your own brand. I know when I started in my current role, I didn't have much of a brand, and now I've managed to build up quite a good brand across, especially across LinkedIn, with posting, etc. So things like your Twitter, your LinkedIn, your Instagram, your Facebook, your different brands. Obviously, you should try and keep your Facebook locked down because you don't want to share, personal information with a potential employer. Strategies to create your personal brand. So you need to identify your unique value proposition. What sets you apart and what value can you bring to a future employer? Create a consistent brand message. Ensure your personal brand message is consistent across all social media channels if you're using more than one. Engage with your audience. So actively engage with your target audience to establish yourself as an expert. And that's basically just posting on LinkedIn regularly. Posting things that are meaningful to what you do, what's happening out there, to try and engage an audience, and also engaging with other people's LinkedIn posts that you're perhaps following, whether you're giving a like or a comment. That's all giving you visibility. By focusing on your personal brand, you can differentiate yourself from other candidates and stand out as an expert in your field as well and be noticed by people. This is just like obviously off my LinkedIn. So I've got got a professional photo. We had those done for our company. Who I am, what I do, where I work. So it's kind of, stands out. And then in regards to like on LinkedIn, especially, you've got the opportunity for a bit of an about section. So I've just kind of put, obviously as a recruiter, what I do is I'm working with hiring managers, I'm working with candidates, the area I specialize in, and how I can help those particular people for that in the area. And then this is what I was saying, like for your experience, should kind of reflect what's on your CV with your experience. So make sure you've got your company you're working for, your role, your dates, etc. Obviously on your CV, you're going to have far more detail than that, but I've got a bit of a long career history, so it would be quite long if I did that. And then obviously I have a Twitter account as well. Not Twitter, sorry, Instagram account. So I kind of kept that professional as well to reflect. So that brings me to the end. And obviously, if anyone wanted any advice on CVs or interviewing or anything like that, feel free to reach out to me. Happy to share some templates, give any advice that people may need. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Rachel. Really appreciate that. And actually got some tips there for my own CV. I'm going to go back and check it because like you, I'm probably significantly older than anybody on the call, so I've got a very long history. And like you, I've had a redundancy in my history as well. We've got some really good questions. The first one I'm going to send to Sophie first and then Rachel. The one that's made it to the top is if there are redundancies going on in my workplace but currently hasn't impacted my team, what should I be doing to prepare myself for a similar situation?
Oh, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
Just again, kind of thinking back of my to my own experience. One of the things that I wish I had done a little bit differently at the time is because I felt so confident that I was going to just get moved into another role. And I was actively I applied for 3 of these new roles that got created. I gave a lot of my time and energy to supporting friends and colleagues who were much, much more worried and much more nervous than me. And so there were 4 people who all ended up kind of, leaning on me for support, saying I'm really worried, and what if I get made redundant? And so I was giving them a shoulder to lean on, and trying to keep them optimistic and give them advice and stuff. And what I wish I'd done differently is I wish that I had done the same thing. Not necessarily to one of them, but I wish that I had found somebody that I felt safe with and that I had expressed my fears and my concerns, because I think it would have helped me to kind of prepare for what became my reality. It just goes back to those 7 stages of grief, shock. Imagine if there was a way to be slightly less shocked when it happened. But I would say it's a balance, right? You don't want to freak people out. If right now you and your team are not affected, then you probably don't need to start lighting a fire where there isn't one. But I think probably just talk about it as this is a reality of working in business. Right? This is what it's like to be an employee. There are going to be decisions made that you can't control. And right now, let's be empathetic to the people who are going through that process, because tomorrow it could be us.
Yeah. And what about you, Rachel? Have you got any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, as Sophie said, I wouldn't worry too much. When I was made redundant, I was working with Hewlett Packard. And they were going through redundant. It seemed like every 6 months, obviously with a huge big global company, they were going through redundancies. And it was kind of you always used to sit there thinking, what if it's me next? What if it, it could be me, or it could be, but you kind of just had to sit there and ride the wave until, your time was up. But I wouldn't let yourself stress too much about it. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Rachel. Back to you, Sophie. How did you figure out your priorities amidst the uncertainty?
Another really good question. For me, it came down to that question of, is there a specific role that I want? Is there a specific job that I want to do? And I don't really care where I do that? Or is it more about the environment I'm in and seeking out a specific style of employer? So for me, what that meant was the first thing that kind of rose to the top for me was wow, I'd really like to work for a charity. I think that would be really fulfilling. I think that would be really interesting. The other thing that appeared on my list was I'd really like to work for a B Corp certified business. And believe it or not, after I left the fixed term position at the charity, I went and worked for a B Corp. So I think it comes down to sort of thinking about your own personal values and your own ideals. What's important to you, not in a work environment, and then can you see how some of that might tie to a work environment? It's also about being really realistic about what you can negotiate on, right? There will be certain things that might come up as part of your application and interview process where you can negotiate, having a bit more flexibility for work at home, and that maybe that is the thing that's most important to you, because you want to be in an environment where you control the temperature and whether or not you have to wear pants, and you want to be able to take your dog for a walk at lunchtime every day. So it comes down to kind of what's the most important thing for you, and there's no limits on that, right? That's different for different people.
Yeah, really good points. I mean, I've just been, I wouldn't say I've just been, but some of the things I've looked at over the last couple of years, if I was thinking about my next role, was to start thinking about the features I want in a role. Such, do I want flexibility? Do I want to work from home? Well, that's obviously something that's come up lately. Do I want to travel, or do I want to stop traveling? Those sorts of things, which help then shape what sort of job you think you will want to go for, rather than thinking about what specific job you want. And that might be different for people at the beginning of their career, if you want a particular type of career, or at the end. But then again, most of us towards the end of our career can look back and go, we didn't actually have this straight line path where we did the roles we thought we were going to do. We went all over the place. So an opportunity came up.
And it's worth acknowledging as well that the position that you have been in or jobs that you've done, you know, prior to your redundancy, don't get too hung up on job titles, because every company treats those differently, right? So I've worked at 3 different organizations in roles that have all been doing kind of the same thing, but they've all had 3 completely different titles. So yeah, I'd say don't get too hung up on that.
Yeah. Rachel, I've got a bit of a technical question here. Let's see how you go on this. Let's say I'm a New Zealand citizen or a resident visa holder and being made redundant. As a good citizen, should I inform Immigration New Zealand so they're aware of this before approving any future visas, since the employer doesn't have a sustainable enough business to hire non-locals?
That is an interesting question. And my advice for that, obviously, none of us here are licensed immigration advisors and we can't give advice on that, but would be to contact Immigration New Zealand and just let them know the status. Given you're on a residence visa, depending whether it's attached to an employer or not. But yeah, I would definitely go and ask them that information. Especially because the immigration is an ever-changing landscape, but it changes all the time. No one can keep up with it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and in this case, it impacts the company as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, we've got one last question we might go through, and we'll do it for both of you, or all 3 of us, because we've all been through redundancies at some point. How has your relationship with employers changed since the redundancy? Can you still find yourself career-driven? Because Lotta, who's asked this question, says she's struggled since being in a toxic workplace and it's hard to trust employers. Okay, so if you've been through this most recently, can you answer this question from Lotta?
Yeah, I absolutely can. First off, I really, really relate to how you're feeling and to your concern, because it's really hard not to get jaded, especially if your redundancy came as a shock, especially if you were really happy where you were, especially if you liked all the people you worked with and thought you had, you know, great relationships, and, you know, you had all this tenure and longevity and all this strength in results. Yeah, that's super, super frustrating. What I would say is just try to keep your chin up. Try to remember that not every organization is the same. You know, the bad experience that you've had doesn't necessarily mean that the next experience is going to be bad. I always try to maintain some optimism and some enthusiasm. Now, in saying that, I think it's important that you get really, really clear on what value you bring to an organization and what value they give to you. Yeah, know your worth. Have a really clear understanding of this is a mutual relationship, right? Like, you hire me to do a job and I do that job and I do that well. And that means you take good care of me and you provide me with, you know, all the things that are expected, things like, you know, salary and whatever else is included in your package. So it's, you know, it's got to be a mutual relationship. I think it's really important. Like, for me, I definitely went through a pretty significant dip. I had come from a spot where I had been very, very career driven, very, very, you know, career orientated, and had a lot of ambition for my career. And at the time, that was very much through a lens of like my career at Spark. I'm going to work here for a long time, and so this, you know, I've done these 6 roles, and then eventually I'll become the CEO, and won't it be great? And yeah, and so once I went through my redundancy, I lost a lot of that drive. I became significantly less career driven. And you know what? I'm not upset about it at all, both because I feel like I got a much, much better balance on my sense of self and, you know, kind of where my personality and my sense of self comes from and my self-esteem, but also because life is short. Work is not the thing that I'm put on this earth to do. It's a necessary thing. And if you're really lucky, you enjoy it and you do it with good people. But it's just about finding that balance between what your life is at work and what your life is outside of work. I would say that if you've ever been a person who's described yourself as a workaholic, or if other people have ever described you that way, it's probably worth having a bit of self-examination and thinking about value and balance in your life. And, maybe with that attitude, you can walk into other workplaces and other kind of, even job interviews and environments feeling like, cool, all right, well, now I've got a clearer sense of what I bring. I have got a clearer sense of what I want to get from you. And how this will benefit me, and what will this, what I can do for you, what you can do for me. And also just that sensation of, everything is temporary. So for me now, like I'm happy where I've ended up. I work with really, really good people in an organization that I'm really, really enjoying their culture. I'm really, really enjoying the environment. There's certainly things about it that I don't love, or that I compare to other places I've worked, primarily Spark, and think, oh yeah, they don't do that as well, or oh, they do that a little bit better. That's okay, because everything is temporary. This is just the job I have right now. It's not the job that I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life.
Okay. Rachel, you got any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I'd probably reflect, what Sophie said, definitely agree with that. I guess from my point of view, my manager was in the US, so I was by myself here in New Zealand working remotely, but my closest team were in Australia. So it kind of affected us also. There's a bit of chit chatter happening with the team, but you've just got to keep your head high and carry on. And knowing the next opportunity is around the corner. And
okay. This really is the last question.
Can I say one more thing, Craig?
Sure.
I just wanted to come back to how the person who asked this question specifically referenced a toxic workplace. And I just want to say that I've experienced that. I've definitely experienced the feeling of like, I do not want to go to work. And it's going to sound really extreme, but like the worst job I ever had, I could tell it was time to leave when one day I was driving to work and I fantasized about having a car accident because it meant that I would not have to go to work that day. And that was it. I know this sounds so extreme, but it was such a wake-up call. It was like, I've got to change my circumstances. So I would say that there's sort of two things to consider if you're in a really toxic environment. Number one is it's time to leave. Find something else. And that can be so scary. That can be so scary, because on the one hand, you have the control to make the decision, but you do not have the control for like what happens next. But you can work with great people, like great recruiters like Rachel, who can help you find the right thing. The other thing that you could choose to do, and sometimes this is much more difficult, but you can try and change that culture. And I've been through that as well. And if you succeed, it is, holy cow, the most satisfying experience like ever. It's pretty incredible, but it's hard and you probably can't do it alone, and it takes time. So if you're feeling like, I'm really desperate, I can't face this anymore, the idea of going to work in this environment is just too hard, I want out, then get yourself out, find yourself another job, start working actively to find other ways to fill up your cup. Yeah. So that's leaning on your support network. That's really, really like revitalizing your hobbies and applying for other jobs. But if you feel like, look, there's so many other things about this that I like, but it's just there's a few people or a few kind of personality clashes, or there's some kind of structural stuff that's not quite right, you could set about trying to change it. And yeah, if anybody wants to discuss that a little bit further, then by all means contact me on LinkedIn and I can give you some hot tips, because I've like I said, I've been through that as well. And when it works, it is amazing.
Cool. All right, Rachel, we've got our last question, which is going to you, which is a question for a recruitment agent. Have you seen short tenures at companies by a candidate being normalized now due to layoffs? Is it now professionally accepted to switch employers frequently, say every 1 to 2 years?
I would say no. If we look at CVs and stuff, and you see, that people have swapped quite frequently, I'd be asking the question why. And I know if we send a profile over to our clients, that we're the first question they come back with and go, oh my God, they've had like 6 jobs in the last 5 years. What's been happening there? I mean, sometimes it's a valid reason. We did see a lot of people go out contracting after COVID. Obviously because there was good contract dollars to be made out there. We did see a lot of people going to work for remote companies, out of Australia or the US, because obviously they were poaching all our good people, and in New Zealand we're screaming out for people. And we have seen a bit of a turnaround in those people in the last couple of months actually wanting to come back and work in with the team because they're not enjoying working 100% remotely and getting to know it. So we're seeing a few of those with the short tenures, but I wouldn't say so much due to redundancy with that.
Okay. But I suppose it comes back to one of the things you said, which is be transparent, open,
Absolutely.
tell people what's going. Yep. Cool. Hey, well, I just want to thank everybody who has joined us today, who's been part of the conversation. Thank you for the questions, and special thanks to Sophie and Rachel from Christchurch who have shared tonight, this afternoon. God, how do I get tonight? This afternoon. And really look forward to being in Christchurch later in May for our next event, but also for the FLINT events that are coming up as well. So thank you again, Rachel and Sophie, and mā te wā.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Craig. Great to see you, Rachel.
Thanks. Bye-bye.